From the heart of our nation's capital, here's Family Research Council President Tony Perkins.
Welcome. Thanks for tuning in and making Washington Watch part of your day. Well, coming up on this Thursday edition, Israeli military forces are making headway in neutralizing Hamas in Gaza City. The IDF reported they had secured and destroyed a wide underground network of tunnels under the city and eliminated a number of Hamas fighters. We'll get a live report from Israel from war correspondent Chuck Holton in just a moment. And then there was 5. The GOP primary field continues to dwindle as the candidates met in Miami, Florida last night for the 3rd GOP primary presidential debate. Former President Donald Trump was not among them. In the shadow of Tuesday's election and Ohio voters placing unrestricted abortion into the state's constitution, the issue of life was not only a prominent topic, but it is also a topic that is drawing lines of separation between the candidates.
So no Republican president can ban abortions any more than a Democrat president can ban these state laws. So let's find consensus. Let's agree on how we can ban late-term abortions. Let's make sure we encourage adoptions and good quality adoptions. Let's make sure we make contraception accessible. Let's make sure that none of these state laws put a woman in jail or give her the death penalty for getting an abortion. Let's focus on how to save as many babies as we can and support as many moms as we can and stop the judgment.
That was former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley. Meg Kilgannon joins me later to break down where the 5 remaining candidates stand on life. Also on Tuesday, voters in Ohio joined 23 other states in legalizing recreational marijuana.
It may be a lesson on messaging, because what the advocates for that said was that this is just like alcohol and we should regulate it and we should tax it just like alcohol. And as I was at the polls yesterday talking to folks, a lot of people seem to agree with that.
That was NBC News correspondent Priscilla Thompson. The question is it just like alcohol? The push to legalize marijuana continues despite mounting research of detrimental effects of marijuana usage. A study that will be presented at the American Heart Association Scientific Sessions in Philadelphia, which begins on Saturday, will highlight research connecting marijuana usage to heart failure. We're going to talk with Dr. John Fleming, physician, former member of Congress, and a former Deputy Assistant Secretary for Health Information Technology in the Trump administration. And finally, as I mentioned yesterday, I sat down with House Speaker Mike Johnson and covered his first 2 weeks as Speaker of the House, including the left's unhinged attacks on his Christian faith.
When you rise up in leadership, there are whole industries, as you know, that are dedicated to taking down public officials like me. They can't stand the idea that someone would openly acknowledge their faith, right? That's not in vogue in Washington anymore. Hasn't been for a long time.
The rest of that interview coming up later here on this edition of Washington Watch. The website's TonyPerkins.com. Resources there for you and contact information for all of our guests. Our word for today comes from 2 Peter, where Peter is warning against false teachers, which was a reoccurring theme in the letters of both Peter and Paul. It was a problem then, and it's a problem now. In chapter 2, Peter writes, "They have forsaken the right way and gone astray, following the way of Balaam, the son of Peor, who loved the wages of unrighteousness. But he was rebuked for his iniquity. A dumb donkey, speaking with a man's voice, restrained the madness of the prophet." Well, Paul continues in chapter 3, where he writes, "You therefore, beloved, since you know this beforehand, beware, lest you also fall from your own steadfastness, being led away by the error of the wicked, but grow in the grace and knowledge of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ." So how do we keep from being led astray? Well, we grow in the grace and knowledge of the Lord by being anchored in His Word. To find out more about our journey through the Bible, go to frc.org/Bible. Israeli forces have continued their push deep into the Gaza Strip, engaging Hamas terrorists in running gun battles while bulldozing and destroying the network of tunnels from which Hamas operates. They've uncovered military installations and munition plants near or even under hospitals, schools, and mosques. Joining me now from the ground in Israel for an update is freelance war correspondent Chuck Holton. Chuck, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Good to see you, Tony.
So, Chuck, give us the latest. It sounds like it was a pretty busy day for Israeli Defense Forces.
Well, it certainly has been. They've been making big gains on the ground, and they are actually approaching the hospital, the only operating hospital now in northern Gaza, the one that they have proof that the headquarters of Hamas is underneath. And so that's going to get very, very difficult as they try to root out from those tunnels all of those Hamas fighters. They have found, as you said, hundreds of sites that were launch sites for missiles, and many of those sites were next to schools, next to mosques, playgrounds, buried in the ground of the playground. And we're starting to learn a little bit about how they are able to continue firing these rockets, because many of them were actually the rocket launchers built into buildings or built into the ground so that they didn't have to set up a rocket launcher or anything like that. They just had to uncover it with a tarp, and they could set a timer and have those things fired. There has not been a day go by since October 7th when we have not had rockets firing out of Gaza. Today was no exception. We had over 10 rocket launches out of Gaza today. And so far, the Hamas terrorists have fired 9,500 rockets between them and Hezbollah since October 7th. Now, they say that about 12% of those rockets have fallen short. And so that all but guarantees that Hamas has killed dozens, if not hundreds, of its own people with those rocket launches. Now, because many of those are homemade rockets and they malfunction. But some of those rockets are long-range rockets, and they're rockets that are given to them or sold to them by countries like North Korea, Iran. And those are the ones that are most concerning because they can strike much deeper into Israel and can pack a bigger punch. Those are the ones that the IDF has been most focused on shooting down. And over the last couple of days, we've seen the number of long-range rockets drop precipitously. So that's a very good sign. I don't think, though, that we'll be able to claim victory in any sense in Gaza until they go at least a day with no rocket launches whatsoever. And let's hope that that happens soon.
So video from both the IDF and Hamas show the urban fighting in Gaza City, and it resembles in many ways the battles to retake Fallujah in Iraq almost 20 years ago. How intense has the fighting that you've seen been?
I think that you could more likely equate it with the battle for Ramadi, because in the battle for Ramadi, the Marine Corps put the word out beforehand and told people they were going to take the city, and that anybody that was left in the city after a certain date would be considered a combatant. That's the only other time that I know of when an army has given the word beforehand what they were going to do in order to give people a chance to leave, because that also gives the benefit to the enemy so that they can further prepare and they can also get their people out, or let's, in this case, here in Gaza, get some of the hostages out, perhaps. It's a good chance that many of those hostages are now no longer in the northern part of Gaza. They're either in southern Gaza or have even been taken out of Gaza altogether to someplace like Iran. So we don't know that for sure. We have only seen very little in the way of proof of life of any of those hostages. And as you know, only one of them so far has been rescued by the IDF. And that's a major concern for the IDF right now. And so they're having to go very slowly and methodically through the outskirts of Gaza and into Gaza City, not only because there are just so many angles from which you can be shot in an urban environment, but specifically because they're trying very hard to kill the enemy without killing people who don't need to be killed, and that includes civilians. They actually have special units that are going in on the ground with the IDF to specifically grab and rescue Palestinian civilians, women and children, that they come upon as they're fighting their way through and spirit them out of the combat zone to the south. As you know, they've also opened up at least one humanitarian corridor. Now they're saying a second one will be opened up as of today that will allow people to flee south. Again, that is a two-edged sword. It helps with the information war, but it also gives Hamas on the ground a chance to get its fighters, wounded or not, out of the combat zone, and maybe even smuggle some of the hostages out as well.
But this really does show the contrast between Israel and Hamas when they're notifying them in advance that they're coming into the city and anyone there is going to be considered a combatant after a certain time period. And then you contrast that with what they're uncovering there in Gaza City, where schools, hospitals, mosques are being used as cover for military operations. I mean, they don't care anything about the civilians.
Well, that's exactly what the leadership of Hamas has been saying all along. And they have said that we are a nation of martyrs. And so we don't have any problem martyring our people for this cause. Now, normally, when a group or a country wants to make heroes out of its people, they're talking about their fighters. They're talking about their heroes are the warriors that go and stand between the enemy and their women and children. In this case, though, Hamas is making the women and children the martyrs, and that is unprecedented in modern war for sure. And so for them to say that they love death as much as we love life, it's kind of hypocritical in a way, because the leadership of Hamas actually isn't in Gaza. They're in Qatar, which brings up a whole nother question, because the United States calls Qatar a trusted ally in the region, but Qatar gives hundreds of millions of dollars to Hamas and hosts the Hamas leadership in their country. And oh, by the way, we have a military base there with 8,000 troops in it. It's just kind of hard to wrap your head around when you start to think about it.
And it's interesting, we don't hear much from the international community condemning Hamas for pushing civilians to the forefront of the battle, whether they want to or not. And I mean, it is quite amazing, the duplicity, the hypocrisy that we see. Chuck, we're almost out of time. The White House today announcing that Israel was going to have these 4-hour pauses each day to allow for humanitarian relief. But then Prime Minister Netanyahu's office dismissed that. So what do we know? Is that going to be taking place each day or not?
Well, it's being reported that it's supposed to happen. And I think the real problem with that is that it's a big publicity coup for Hamas, because Hamas's objective here is legitimacy. And so by negotiating with these terrorists, they are being given legitimacy. And this is all coming under heavy, heavy pressure from the United States. Now, also, I would say every time there has been any kind of lull in the fighting since it began after October 7th, Hamas has used that time to fire more rockets into Israel. And so I will be watching very closely to see if that happens, if they actually do these humanitarian pauses, if they have rockets come flying out of Gaza into Israel during those supposedly ceasefires. But again, all this does is it takes the pressure off Hamas. And taking the pressure off Hamas is doing exactly what President Reagan, back when I was a young man, said that we should never do, and that's negotiate with terrorists.
Right, absolutely. Chuck Holton, thanks so much for joining us. We continue to pray for your safety, so please stay safe. We look forward to talking to you again real soon.
All right.
Folks, stick around. On the other side of the break, we're going to talk presidential politics and the issue of life. The debate last night, how did life factor in? Meg Kilgannon joins us to talk about it.
Everything we do begins as an idea. Before there can be acts of courage, there must be the belief that some things are worth sacrificing for. Before there can be marriage, there is the idea that man should not be alone. Before there was freedom, there was the idea that individuals are created equal. It's true that all ideas have consequences, but we're less aware that all consequences are the fruit of ideas. Before there was murder, there was hate. Before there was a Holocaust, there was the belief by some people that other people are undesirable. Our beliefs determine our behavior, and our beliefs about life's biggest questions determine our worldview. Where did I come from? Who decides what is right and wrong? What happens when I die? Our answers to these questions explain why people see the world so differently. Debates about abortion are really disagreements about where life gets its value. Debates over sexuality and gender and marriage are really disagreements about whether the rules are made by us or for us. What we think of as political debates are often much more than that. They're disagreements about the purpose of our lives and the source of truth. As Christians, our goal must be to think biblically about everything. Our goal is to help you see beyond red and blue, left and right, to see the battle of ideas at the root of it all. Our goal is to equip Christians with a biblical worldview and help them advance and defend the faith in their families, communities, and the public square. Cultural renewal doesn't begin with campaigns and elections. It begins with individuals turning from lies to truth. But that won't happen if people can't recognize a lie and don't believe truth exists. We want to help you see the spiritual war behind the political war, the truth claims behind the press release, and the forest from the trees.
Welcome back to Washington Watch. Good to have you with us on this Thursday. The website is tonyperkins.com. All right, as we were talking about top of the program, the third GOP presidential primary debate took place last night in Miami, Florida. And just as in the previous two debates, the candidates squared off without the frontrunner, as former President Donald Trump again declined to participate. He had his own event down in Florida, not too far from the debate. Now, this third debate comes just a day after Ohio voters passed Issue 1, which legalizes abortion all the way to the moment of birth in the state's constitution. Now, this is a big contrast to the laws in Ohio at present. Now, the debate last night, I think, offered Republican candidates the opportunity to react to the narrative of the legacy media that the media is pushing to scare Republicans out of promoting the sanctity of human life. So how did they respond? Did they take the opportunity to communicate a pro-life message? Well, joining me now to discuss this, Meg Kilgannon, Senior Fellow for Education Studies at the Family Research Council. She served in the Department of Education during the Trump administration. Meg, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Thanks, Tony.
So the legacy media wants to create instant analysis of who won and who lost last night. But let's talk about how the candidates handled the issue of protecting life, especially coming just a day after Issue 1 passed Ohio, making it the 7th state that has put abortion into the state's constitution or restricted pro-life laws. So did we see a difference between the candidates last night?
We did. I watched that segment of the debate about 3 times today to get ready for our talk right now, and I got to tell you, I felt like I was more confused the more I listened about what was a cohesive pro-life message from the Republican Party or from any one candidate. I mean, they were just all over the map, and I really feel like it shouldn't be that hard as long as Republicans have had the pro-life issue as, you know, the definitive platform of the party. And pretty much if you're not pro-life, you're not going to get the nomination, right? To have that display on stage was really quite something.
So what's changed in terms of the issue of the sanctity of life, the desire to protect the unborn and women post-Roe? I mean, why do we see now politicians that are stumbling over themselves when before there was great clarity?
Well, before, when we were still operating under the false idea that there's a constitutional right to an abortion, which of course there is not and there cannot be, then it's easy to say that you're pro-life and not really have to be very specific about it, right? Because it's not really an available option to you. So now that it matters, candidates are struggling, and you're finding out who has consistent pro-life values that are based on maybe a larger worldview, a faith tradition, some real meaning to them, rather than just, oh, that's what I have to say if I want to be Republican, and so okay, I'll say I'm pro-life. You could see a range on the stage, and then you have people who have said they're consistently pro-life, and maybe they have voted pro-life or supported pro-life policies, and yet they are in the face of recent electoral challenges for the issue. They're sort of walking it back or rethinking it or wondering if this is still what we should be doing as a party. And so we shouldn't be leaving that much wiggle room. This is what we should still be doing as a party, right?
Let's kind of go down the list. There's 5 candidates. It's like musical chairs. It seems like every time we go to a new debate, the music is stopped and we lose one. So from what I heard from Governor DeSantis, it doesn't seem like he's equivocating. It sounds like he's talking about creating a culture of life. He's got a record.
He did.
So
he did.
Give me your take on him.
He did, but having signed a 6-week bill, he certainly didn't mention that he did that, and he seemed open to some sort of to some sort of compromise on that point. I didn't hear any of them really use the term baby when they were talking about it, which was interesting to me. But I thought his life was probably, of all the answers, one of the better ones. But I don't really want to hear about adults necessarily when I'm talking about when they're talking about this issue. I'd like to hear about the unborn child that we're protecting.
What's amazing about that to me, Meg, is that that's the conversation that we've been having for 4 decades. It's about the unborn child, and for some reason, I don't know if it's the media that's driving this narrative. And they're scared, they're responding to it. I don't really expect that from DeSantis because he's got such a great record on the life issue as governor. And I think past performance is the best indicator of future performance based on my quarter of a century in politics. Let's talk about South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley. She declared, I'm unapologetically pro-life, but then she gets into this thing, don't judge me for being pro-life and I won't judge you. I mean, who's judging? We're talking about laws.
Yeah, her answer, I think, was the most confusing and frankly offensive of any of the candidates. I just really did not enjoy her answer. I mean, saying that we need to make sure abortion is or contraception is accessible. I mean, are we going to pay for that too?
And what about her comment?
Since when is it not?
Her comment about putting mothers, given the death penalty. I mean, I missed that somewhere. This is the talking points of the left.
Exactly. And to call the pro-life base of the Republican Party to make them seem like we're some sort of ogres or somehow we're that we have to be managed or I don't know what the point of that is. It was really disingenuous.
So Tim Scott, give me, before we run out of time, Tim Scott. He embraced the pain bill that Lindsey Graham is introducing. At the point of child feels pain, sucking its thumb, we should have that should be the bare minimum of protection across the nation. He did.
I have heard him speak more eloquently about life, but he did say that at the debate last night.
All right. Well, we'll have to leave Governor Christie, who is pretty weak on this.
Yes.
I guess he's okay, but he's still weak. And Vivek, he's just depends on the day of the week.
Right.
He did have a good statement last night on the life issue.
Did.
So he did last night, but never know where he may be. Meg Kilgannon, great to see you. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Tony.
All right, we'll continue that conversation another time. Coming up next, marijuana. Also in the state of Ohio on Tuesday, voters approved recreational marijuana. But there are some significant health consequences. We're going to talk about that next with Dr. John Fleming. Don't go away.
All of us are born with the desire to find truth and meaning. Where did I come from? What happens when I die? While our answers to these questions may divide us, we are united in our need for the freedom to answer life's biggest questions and make life's biggest decisions for ourselves. That's why religious freedom matters for everyone. Religious freedom matters because the powerful have long wanted to control those who are less powerful. Religious freedom matters because the freedom of those who are different is often threatened by those who believe different is dangerous. Leah Sheribu, a Christian teenager in Nigeria, remains a captive of Boko Haram for her refusal to renounce her Christian faith. Chinese pastor Wang Yi is serving a 9-year sentence for speaking publicly against the Chinese government. In Pakistan, Asif Pervez is on death row for allegedly sending a blasphemous text message. All of this because people in power decided different is dangerous. At the Center for Religious Liberty at Family Research Council, we promote religious freedom for everyone because the only alternative is religious freedom for no one. We encourage Americans and the American government to engage and advocate for the persecuted, and they do. We work every day to bring good news to the afflicted, to proclaim liberty to captives and freedom to prisoners. We do it because that's what Jesus does. We work to give freedom to others because we ourselves have been set free.
Two new studies link daily marijuana use with a higher risk of heart failure or heart attack, especially in older users. Now, the numbers appear convincing. One study followed more than 150,000 people for nearly 4 years and saw those with daily marijuana use had a 34% increased risk of heart failure. As more states legalize recreational marijuana, as we saw with Issue 2 in Ohio this past week, what are the national health implications to this increased government-sanctioned use of marijuana? Here to discuss this, Dr. John Fleming, former congressman from the 4th District of Louisiana, who served as a deputy secretary at HHS. He also served in the nation's military as a naval medical doctor. Dr. Fleming, welcome back to Washington Watch. Good to see you.
Yes. Hey, Tony. Great to be with you again.
Thanks for taking time off the campaign trail as you run for treasurer in Louisiana to join us to talk about a really important issue. We've talked about this before. You've studied the harmful effects of marijuana for years. What jumped out at you from this latest study?
Well, this study really grabbed me because I'd seen nothing written about this, but I really felt at my core as a physician, as somebody who has treated a lot of people with lung and heart disease related to tobacco, that marijuana, smoking it, has got to be as dangerous, if not more so, than tobacco, cigarettes. And in fact, this study actually comes out, as you said, it's a very large study over a number of years. So there's no question now that the tar and all the toxic chemicals and everything that we find in cigarettes are also in marijuana as well.
Now, this comes, as I said, in Ohio, now we have almost 24 states that have recreational marijuana use. And this comes at a time when we have record deaths related to drugs, not marijuana, but fentanyl. And it doesn't seem consistent if we're concerned about drug usage, drug-related deaths, that we would be moving to make drugs more accessible.
Absolutely, Tony. It's a seamless process. And you may be aware that I wrote a book back in 2006 based on the premise that the earlier a child is exposed to addicting chemicals, whether it's tobacco, alcohol, marijuana, whatever, the studies show clearly that the brain becomes imprinted on these addictive substances, whatever they may be, and they have a much higher risk of ultimately developing alcoholism, drug addiction, whatever. And the rates of addiction have been going up progressively as we become more relaxed about access by children, young adults to these addicting substances. We're having more and more problems, and the drugs are more and more powerful, which is why you see the zombie effect that we see today on the streets of San Francisco. So it's bad on the addiction side, it's bad on the health side, and you've heard me talk before about the other problems that we see, hyperemesis syndrome, where people can't stop throwing up, acute and chronic psychoses, including schizophrenia, much higher percent. And even among young people, they've measured that from teen years to the early 30s, they lose 8 points in their IQ.
So Dr. Fleming, one of the talking points, if you will, of those that are promoting the legalization or decriminalization of marijuana is that, hey, it's just like alcohol. Let's just go ahead and legalize it and let's tax it. So what would you say to that? Do we know that alcohol, there are hazardous effects to it as well, but is that really an apple-to-apple comparison?
No, not at all. There's a huge social cost to recreational and even medicinal use of marijuana. And what we see evolving today is big marijuana. Now, what does that mean? Let's go back to the 60s and 70s when we found out that people were dying right and left of heart disease. My dad died at age 43 as a chain smoker. My mother at age 56 of colon cancer. Both of them were chain smokers. And so what we found was people were dying prematurely. And as a result of that, there were investigations, and big tobacco, as you recall, they all claimed that they couldn't find any addictive effects at all of tobacco. And later that was proven to be wrong, and then we had these big tobacco settlements. Well, big marijuana now is replacing big tobacco. It's a big business, and people are making a lot of money on it, and they're doing it at the expense of our young people. And the taxes that are coming in from that is far below projected levels, but it doesn't come close to taking care of the health and psychiatric problems that develop as a result of these drugs.
Yeah, I was going to say this is going to lead to big government, because as we now say that health care is a right and government is going to provide it, this is only going to make it more difficult to ration what care, or it's going to lead to the rationing of the care we have because we're increasing the problems. Dr. Fleming, we're out of time, but always great to see you again. Thanks so much for taking time to join us today.
Great, Tony. Thank you once again.
All right, we'll see you real soon. Dr. John Fleming, former congressman, a former member of the Trump administration in the Department of Health and Human Services. All right, coming up next, my sit-down interview on Capitol Hill with House Speaker Mike Johnson. We're going to take a look at that coming up straight ahead here on this edition of Washington Watch. Don't go away.
The world is hurting, streets are filled with crime, families are broken, sin is celebrated, and God is mocked. Everywhere we look, the wages of our sin are on full display. As Christians, we know that surrender to God's will is the solution to our biggest problems, but not everyone agrees. Even in church, we hear people say the most important thing is to be tolerant, that we shouldn't impose our morality on other people, and that loving our neighbor means celebrating what they do. But you can't do that. It's not that you don't love your neighbor, you do, but you care about God's opinion more than your neighbor's opinion, and this makes you different. In fact, sometimes it makes you feel alone, like you're the only one. But there is good news. You are not alone, not even close. Research has found that there are 59 million American adults who are a lot like you. There are millions of people around the country who are born again, deeply committed to practicing their faith, and believe the Bible is the reliable Word of God. But that's not all. They're also engaged in our government. They're voters. They're more likely to be involved in their community, and they're making a difference in elections. The problem is that a lot of them feel alone too. We want to change that. FRC wants to connect these 59 million Americans to speak the truth together, no matter the cost. If you want to learn more about this group and what it means to be a spiritually active, governance-engaged conservative, or if you want to find out if you are one of these SageCons yourself, go to frc.org/SageCon and take the quiz to find out. The world is hurting, and we have the solution. We can't do it alone, but we can do it if we work together. That's what we're working toward every day. Join us. Go to frc.org/SAGECON, SageCon, to learn more. That's SAGECON, SageCon, to learn more.
I'm often asked by people, Tony, how do you stay encouraged? How do you deal with all of the stuff in Washington, D.C., the negative policies that are attacking our faith, our family, and our freedoms? Well, you want me to let you in on the secret? It's called the Word of God. And that is why the Family Research Council embarked on Stand on the Word, a 2-year journey through the Bible. It's a chronological Bible reading plan with just 10 to 15 minutes a day. In 2 years, you will have covered the entire Bible. And to go along with this, Monday through Friday, I do a morning devotional that goes along with the reading of the day. It's all designed to encourage you on this journey because the Word of God, as the psalmist said, in my affliction, here's my comfort. Your Word gives me life. That is our source of strength. To find out more, go to tonyperkins.com or frc.org/Bible. And I invite you to join me every morning for our Stand on the Word Bible devotion. Welcome back to Washington Watch. Well, it's been a whirlwind in Washington since Louisiana Congressman Mike Johnson was elected Speaker of the House 2 weeks ago today. Congress currently faces many crucial issues, including the urgent need to provide military aid to Israel and to pass key appropriations bills. All of this as the November 17th deadline of government funding draws closer. The left, with the help of the legacy media, sometimes one and the same, has been working hard to demonize Speaker Johnson, even attacking him for his covenant marriage, as we've talked about here on the program, and sound parenting practices. But we've seen both his unwavering faith and his dedication to the position that God has placed him in at this critical time, and it's refreshing. Yesterday, I sat down with Speaker Johnson in the Capitol for an in-person interview. Here's what we discussed. I'm here with Speaker Mike Johnson in the ceremonial room for the House Speaker, just off the House floor. Speaker Mike Johnson. You know, that has a nice ring to it.
I'm not used to it yet. Welcome to the Capitol. Welcome to the ceremonial office, one of the Speaker's offices. There are many, I've learned, in the last 10 days or so. It's great to have you here.
So 2 weeks as House Speaker, what was it like after that vote? I mean, we watched the speech, but let me ask this, has it settled in yet?
It hasn't really, to be honest. It's been a whirlwind. As soon as I was handed the gavel, they told me when you step down from the rostrum, your life will not be the same so long as you hold the gavel. And it's largely been true. This is an all-points bulletin kind of job. I mean, you have to be on 24 hours a day. There's not a lot of downtime. And I think that's particularly true right now because of the way this transition happened. It was regretful.
But that's not new for you.
Well,
I mean, you've been 24/7 since I've known you.
True. Perhaps I was prepared for that. But to assume a speakership, to begin one midstream in the midst of a Congress, is very different than it's normally done.
Plus, not going through the various, usually it's like majority leader, then speaker.
Right.
I mean, you came from being the vice chair of the conference. Now, you did serve as chairman of the RSC, but I mean, this is like going from, 0 to Mach speed in 30 seconds.
Somebody said it's the JV team to the NFL. Okay, whatever the metaphor is. It was a lot. And there was a lot to be done because we were kind of in a tumultuous period for those weeks. And we had to pull the team together. We had to cast the vision. We had to staff up immediately. The Speaker's office has I think, over 80 employees with the various divisions and jobs that must be handled. We had to, set the policies and procedures in place. And immediately, of course, upon us is the government funding issues and the appropriations deadline and all the rest. So it's been a lot. It's been a lot.
Well, let's talk about some of those issues. As you 2 weeks into the position, the top 3 issues facing you, what would you say they are?
Well, the immediate that's before us and we face next week is November 17, and that's when the government funding runs out and we would go into a shutdown if we don't either complete the appropriations process or do some sort of stopgap funding measure.
And you've been working, the House is working late into the night to get these appropriations bills done.
Right.
But you're not going to get them all done by the 17th.
No, and part of the reason for that is there was no muscle memory. This has actually not been done for quite some time in Washington. In fact, they told us it could not be done. But this House Republican majority committed to doing it a different way, to changing how Washington works. And I'm pleased to say that we've done a great job in that regard. We're moving the separate appropriations bills through the process, but we've run out of time because we lost a little bit of the clock and a little bit of the calendar. And so it will require a stopgap measure to allow us additional time to complete that process. But I'm very optimistic about this. As late as last night, I'm meeting personally with small groups, subsets of members, and talking through their ideas on that, concerns, and we're reaching consensus. I'll tell you, this is an encouragement that there is a great esprit de corps amongst the members in the House, more than I've ever seen since I've been here for 7 years.
I can echo that. That's what I'm saying.
And then they went home, Tony, last weekend and the weekend before, and they received that same level of energy, esprit de corps from the grassroots, from the base at home, from constituents, even in different parties.
And I'm hearing it in the narrative when we're talking about the time. The clock is ticking. We're less than 2 weeks away from the deadline here. But I'm not hearing anything about a government shutdown. I'm hearing about how we're going to fix this among all the members.
That's right.
On the Republican side.
And we're not going to fix it the way they have always done to us in the past, as long as I've been here, and that is wait till the very last minute right before Christmas and jam an omnibus spending package upon members of Congress and thus the people that spends, trillions of dollars and is 3,000 pages that no one read.
That's the playbook every time.
We're not doing that playbook anymore.
Good. Yeah. Let's talk Israel.
Mm-hmm.
That is, the Middle East is, it looks like it could spin out of control at any moment.
Yeah. It can, and you saw. Not only did I address that as a top priority in my speech before I took the oath of office, I also came out as literally the first act under my speakership was the resolution to declare our commitment to Israel, our great friend and ally. And every day since then, we have been emphasizing that. The first major bill that we passed was the Israel supplemental funding package, the aid that they desperately need, and is exactly the amount that was requested even by the White House.
But the Senate's not moving it.
They're not moving it. You know why? Because we added a pay for. What a concept. That's another thing that we're doing differently. We can't just borrow the money from some other country to spend and help our
$33 trillion in debt. At what point do we say enough is enough?
33.6 trillion, and it adds every moment. While we're recording this, we'll go another 20 or $30 million in debt, just over a few minutes. It's not sustainable. So we have obligations as the great superpower, the great leader in the world. But our first obligation is stewardship of the precious resources of the American people. And maybe I'm old school, Tony, but I think we can do these things simultaneously, but it takes fiscal discipline. Every hardworking family in America has to make a budget. They have to live within their means. They don't get to spend beyond that. And their government should operate on the same principles. It's not rocket science, but we've gotten away from it. And that's why we're in this terrible situation. And we're trying to bring common sense back to the equation. And so taking $14.5 billion out of a $67 billion fund that was set there to build up the IRS and hire new IRS agents to go and audit small businesses and families, okay? If you're weighing those priorities, I sent the message to Senator Schumer and the Democrats who run the Senate. I think helping Israel right now is a little bit higher priority than hiring IRS agents. I wasn't trying to make a political statement. That just makes sense to us, and it makes sense to the people.
House Speaker Mike Johnson, I like that ring. I'll never get tired of saying that. So we've worked on this issue in years past, religious freedom, freedom of speech. Are you concerned by what we see happening across America when it comes to the anti-Semitic activity and not only on college campuses, but now right here in our nation's capital?
We're seeing it everywhere. I really thought that a large wave of anti-Semitism was not something that we would see in America. I thought we were kind of beyond that. There's always pockets of that, but wow, I mean, it's been shocking to see how this kind of uprising of anti-Semitism is just infected the whole country. And a lot of it is sort of centered in the college campuses, and they've been indoctrinated by these radical leftist professors and all of that. We know that that's a cultural issue, but to have it here in Congress has been so disconcerting. I mean, we had a member of Congress in the last 24 hours who doubled down on this, from, what do they say, from the sea to the ocean. Basically, the message is they want to eradicate the state of Israel.
Right.
And that's an elected member of the people in the United States Congress.
Yeah, speaking out in support of a terrorist group.
Yes, they're not just pro-Palestinian. It's as if they're supporting the atrocious actions of Hamas. I mean, it's devastating. We heard the harrowing stories of families of these kidnapping victims in Israel. We had a candlelight vigil, a bipartisan vigil, by the way, on the steps of the House last night, and I led the group in prayer. And I prayed to God that we would have peace in Jerusalem. We'd have peace in Israel. We're admonished in Scripture to pray that and to insist upon it. And it was a great feeling there to have Republicans and Democrats standing united in this cause. And I think we need to send that message around the world.
Well, along those lines, when I was chairing the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, we were actually looking at the anti-Semitism that was taking place in Western Europe. Mm-hmm. And I remember hearing from the official from the United Nations who oversees the anti-Semitism effort there. And he said that, we need to be paying attention because it's the canary in the coal mine. Mm-hmm. And when you look at what's happening here in the United States, it's not going to stop with this anti-Israel, anti-Jewish. I mean, it moves to Christianity next. History tells us that.
Well, sure it does. And our faiths are tied together. I mean, especially in this country, of course, we speak often about our Judeo-Christian foundations, and we have that in common. And so it's a matter of faith to us, but it's also a matter of common sense and principle. I mean, it makes sense for us to support our strongest ally in the Middle East. They're the only democracy in that region, and they're surrounded by neighbors who now, clearly, we know, want to eradicate them. And it makes good sense from a public policy standpoint, from an investment standpoint. We have to have Israel be sustained and survive and be strong. And I've committed that to Prime Minister Netanyahu, to my counterpart, who's the Speaker of the Knesset, in the last few days. They invited me to come and address the Knesset, and I'm going to plan to do that as soon as possible, because I think we need to continue to just reinforce and double down on this idea that America will always stand with Israel. This is the right side of the conflict.
Is this same spirit what is driving the attacks on when you see the hostility toward Christian faith? I mean, you've been attacked for your faith.
Yeah.
The fact that you have a covenant marriage.
Mm-hmm. Yes, right.
Which I had something to do with.
It's your fault.
Yeah. But, so, and you're protecting your kids from evil influences. Somehow doing what used to be normal makes you a target, a villain.
It's been remarkable, hasn't it? Look, we know what comes with the territory when you rise up in leadership. There are whole industries, as you know, that are dedicated to taking down public officials like me. They can't stand the idea that someone would openly acknowledge their faith, right? That's not in vogue in Washington anymore. Hasn't been for a long time. So what you're seeing right now is Washington and the surrounding press corps interacting with a leader who openly acknowledges what he believes. What a concept. I mean, within previous generations, everyone did.
Right.
As of right now, the polling affirms that over a majority of the American people also identify as Christians, with their faith. This should not be a remarkable thing. What would be remarkable to the framers of our Constitution that this would be controversial.
Right.
That's how far we've
But
come.
I think that's a part of the cancel culture to try to suppress, repress, to make people of faith feel like they're isolated and alone, so they'll go silent. And that's all the more reason we need to speak up.
Well, and that's what's happened over decades. We've lamented this many times. We saw the trend happen, the cultural shifts in America, because they convinced Americans over time that there was this rigid, the separation of church and state. Of course, they take the phrase completely out of context from the letter that Jefferson wrote. We all know that. And what they've convinced a generation or two of Americans of is that means that faith can have no influence in the public square. Of course, the original meaning of the First Amendment was that the government cannot encroach upon the church, right? They wanted, the founders were so clear, they wanted a vibrant expression of faith in the public square because they knew that what we were doing here was an experiment in self-governance. And they knew that to maintain a constitutional republic of, by, and for the people, you had to have a basic consensus, a sense of morality and virtue that undergirded the republic, or else it wouldn't continue. I mean, Washington said, of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. And then John Adams comes next and he says, look, our Constitution is made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. We have completely forgotten those notions, and we got to get back to it.
That'd make a great course to teach.
Oh yeah, I've done that. I've done that. Yep.
How can our viewers and our listeners be praying for you and Kelly and the family?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it's no fun to be lied about and maligned and misquoted. You've faced that in your time and service and career as well. I got a resilient little team, little family, and I'm blessed. Kelly is a woman of strong faith. She knows, she believes God called us to this, and so she's being sustained by the prayers and support and encouragement of lots of friends and people that we don't even know around the country who are praying for us. All of our kids feel that. They're not unaccustomed to this either. And we're going to get through it. Look, I'm undaunted by it. I had my feelings surgically removed back in the 1980s, so they can't hurt my feelings. It's no fun to have your family, attacked in the way they are, but they have a strong sense about why we're here, and we're sticking together. But we appreciate all those prayers and that encouragement and support.
But part of the strength comes from the fact that you could see God's hand at work. And you made reference to this in your opening speech when you were accepted the nomination and you were voted in as Speaker. God has been directing your steps, members here. God, nothing happens by chance.
Yeah, I mean, Scripture is very clear about that. And if you are a Bible-believing Christian, you know that God is the one that raises up people in authority and he sets down others, and he is sovereign. And so understanding that is actually a very liberating truth, right?
It is.
I mean, it takes the burden. He says, my burden is light. Because if you're doing your best, as flawed as you are, to operate in accordance with God's principles and to do what is right and good for the people, then God blesses that, and it takes the responsibility in some measure off your shoulders. As John Quincy Adams famously said, "Duty is ours, results are God's." Right?
You know that quote too. I do. He said it right there on the House floor.
That's right. Exactly.
When they passed the gag rule to keep him from talking about slavery.
Yep. That's right.
Speaker Mike Johnson, thanks so much for taking time to join us today.
Thank you, and for all the influence and the mentorship over the years. I really appreciate it.
And we're going to be praying for you even harder now.
Thank you. We need it.
Well, I want to encourage you to join with us in praying for Mike Johnson and for Congress and all of those in authority. Paul wrote to Timothy in 1 Timothy chapter 2, he said, "Therefore I exhort first of all that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and giving of thanks be made for all men, for kings and all who are in authority, that we may," here's the key, "lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and reverence. For this is good and acceptable in the sight of our God and Savior." So if you'd like to join us, this is a great opportunity to see the power of prayer at work. So if you'd like to join us, text the word speaker to 67742. That's the word speaker to 67742 and join us in praying for Speaker Mike Johnson.
Washington Watch with Tony Perkins is brought to you by Family Research Council and is entirely listener supported. Portions of the show discussing candidates are brought to you by Family Research Council Action. For more information on anything you've heard today, or to find out how you can partner with us in our ongoing efforts to promote faith, family, and freedom, visit TonyPerkins.com. Also, to leave a comment about Washington Watch, call our watch line at 1-866-372-7234. That's 1-866-372-7234.